The Valley of Defilement is one of my favorite areas in any Souls game. It's hands down the best swamp-themed area out of any of them by a significant margin. The atmosphere here is palpable. The rain quietly falling through the ramshackle housing. The buzz of insects descending from above. The dreamlike trek through the seemingly endless darkness of the swamp as bizarre creatures slowly approach. One of the core themes of Demon Souls is the hubris of mankind, filled with demonic manifestations of our various failings: pride, greed, gluttony. The valley is a parable of poverty. It's filled with the castaways of Boletarian society, but unlike the other areas in the game, this place was already a nightmare before the demons arrived. The lowest social caste resides here, devoured by literal parasites and smothered by the refuse of the rest of society. The valley has some of the best environmental storytelling of the game. Disease is of course a major theme here, and it's reflected in just about every way possible. The enemies are exhaling visible poison. The living burn incense, presumably made of the lotus flowers we can use to heal poison and plague in corpses to ward off disease and bugs. There are numerous partial remains of rats and dogs, with a rare deer visible, a desperate last resort as their available food supplies dwindle. The Shinto element of associating still waters with corruption and decay, last discussed in the Shrine of Storms video, and present in nearly every one of the modern From Software games, again returns with relevancy here. In medieval Europe, the Black Death, or Plague, in its worst surge, is estimated to have killed between 30 to 50% of the European population between 1347 and 1353. That's between 75 and 200 million people. Evidence suggests that it was most likely carried by fleas feeding on rats before also spreading person to person as a pneumonic plague. This, combined with the general lack of hygiene within European society at the time, ensured rapid transmission of disease. In the Valley of Defilement, poison and plague are of course ever present. Appropriately enough, rats will quickly infect you with plague if they get a chance to get a few bites in. The typical depiction of the medieval plague doctor, tasked with the treatment of the sick, was usually one with a long coat, boots, gloves, and most significantly, the unusual beaked mask. This costume is usually credited to the early 17th century French court physician Charles Delorme. The beak of the mask was filled with strong-smelling herbs and flowers, as it was believed at the time that disease spread through miasma, or bad-smelling air. As is usually the case with the game, this element of human culture has been warped by the demonic influence, resulting in the bizarre visage of the depraved ones here. Another aspect of their appearance, based on real-world elements, are their bloated bellies. Kwashiorkor is a severe form of malnourishment, in which a lack of nutrients, specifically proteins, causes water retention and fluid buildup in the abdomen. It's clear that the residents of the valley lack any kind of dependable food supply, much less a nutritious one. In an interview with Game Informer from 2009, director of the game Hidetaka Miyazaki described the valley as a place of natural evil, in contrast to the Tower of Latria being a place of man-made evil. Disease is something that could be considered a natural evil, but this philosophy can also extend to the flora and fauna here as well. In addition to the plague rats, the valley also features giant ticks and mosquitoes, both of which are disgustingly high detail, and feature some interesting little details. The giant ticks have a small but detailed and animated proboscis. If struck, the bloated poisonous blood sacs pop, and the tick will attempt to helplessly try and escape from you. This may be an oversight, but you can actually pass by them with no danger by rolling into them, which will gradually shift a bit in somewhat of an awkward-looking way. Faith weapons and other related items are found here in abundance, either in a form of irony considering how God-forsaken this area is, or perhaps a reflection of sincerity and prayer. It's also worth noting that Faint Stone is found in abundance here, the upgrade stones that are used for the Blessed Infusion, which restore your character's health while equipped, a holy counter-effect to the poison and plague. Similar to the cobwebs we see before the armor spider, we begin to see leeches on the walls and corpses shortly before the first boss, the Leech Monger, giving him a bit of environmental foreshadowing. The Leech Monger can regenerate health by literally replacing the killed leeches with fresh new ones, emphasizing the demonic influence on the natural elements here. The Leech Monger's soul can be used to make Poison Cloud, but also the Cure Miracle, in a reference to leeches being used in the practice of medieval medicine. Leeches have been used medically for thousands of years, dating back to ancient Greece and Egypt. They believed that the removal of blood from a patient could prevent illness and cure disease. The second area begins with the striking image of distant flames flickering in a sea of darkness, framed by candles that are nearly at their end. These candles are a symbolic image representing the near extinguishment of life in this area. At the swamp's edge, dead fish are found, evidence of the poison you must now traverse through. And thus begins one of the most surreal sequences in this series of games. The total darkness broken only by flames and the reflections in the water, the bizarre creatures, and only the occasional ramshackle landmark emphasizes the dreamlike atmosphere found here. In these videos, I've generally avoided making comparisons to Blue Point's remake of Demon's Souls, but one major and tone-altering difference can be observed here. In the remake, with the entire stage visible as soon as you walk in, this effect is lost completely, in addition to the questionable change of making the literal Valley of Defilement into a cavern, in which it is still somehow managing to rain. Additionally, those symbolic melted candles are now generic torches. I'll leave it at that for now regarding comparisons, other than to conclude by saying that the remake is full of these oversights and changes, and if you're interested in a deeper analysis and contrasting of the two versions of the game, I have made a few videos comparing them. But back to the original game, the lack of major geographical reference points is deliberate, serving to increase your chances of getting lost. But the trick to navigating this place is to simply follow the fire, which provides a clear path to the mandatory route. The grotesque jellyfish-esque monsters here are corruptions of the lotus flowers found within the game, the royal lotus being an item that heals poison, and the widow's lotus being an item that cures plague. The item description of the widow's lotus notes that they were fastened to the corpses of those who died of plague, later coming to generally represent people claimed by the disease. This is yet again an example of the demons twisting an element of nature and humanity in an ironic way. This area is also the first appearance of the meat cleaver wielding invader woman archetype in these games, and again I think it was done best here. You get no warning, no invasion sound effect, just this phantom emerging from the darkness and rushing at you. Her meat cleaver is the adjudicator's weapon, which is described as having the ability to transform sinners into delicious-looking cuts of meat, and her use of it implies her cannibalism, as well as incorporating the faith element found in this area. The boss of this section, the Dirty Colossus, is the combination of natural elements, man-made garbage, and insects. One of its attacks is to cover you in flies. In one of the rare bits of environmental interactivity in these games, touching one of the torches in this area will burn them away. The Dirty Colossus also has an unusual sphere in its core. In the final area of the valley, we are introduced to what is possibly the single most interesting plot element of the entire game via Maiden Astrea and Garl Vinland. As you enter, an uncanny red fog permeates the area, emphasizing this nightmarish atmosphere of pain and sacrifice. The inequality and injustice of the valley has caused Maiden Astrea to second-guess her faith. She embraces a demon soul in order to offer purification and peace to the afflicted inhabitants of the valley. Once a sixth saint, Astrea lived with those awaiting death in the Valley of Defilement.
Go forth, Garl Vinland. May you be unharmed.
She pledges herself to a demon soul rather than a cruel god in order to ease the pain of the people there. In doing so, she has effectively replaced God in the eyes of the residents. They praise her, and it goes beyond simple worship, as elements of a new organized religious practice have begun to form. Some of the depraved ones, the ones who cast poison mist, wear crude ceremonial robes. By killing the last shaman before the Dirty Colossus boss fight, you can find the shaman's clothes set, which has the description, clothes of a dubious, heretical shaman. Bags to store knickknacks are attached all over. Some sort of foul-smelling tallow is also stuck to it. The aggression of the residents can be explained by their desire to protect their new god, as well as to purify the non-believers, evidence of which is readily visible throughout the second stage of the valley. But most, perhaps importantly, lest we forget, the Archstone description points out that the inhabitants readily offer their souls to the Maiden to relieve their suffering. Theirs, and anyone else's, they can take by force. By sacrificing their souls, the residents have become mindless husks, eternally indebted to her. Like the rest of the archdemons, the ultimate point of the collection of souls, whether Astrea realizes it or not, is to feed the old one, and in doing so, contribute to the extinction of mankind. In her attempt at easing the pain of the villagers, she has damned them to an endless and mindless existence in the valley. She is surrounded by golden and ornate offerings, but one very unusual detail seen here is that the silver coins that are littered all around where she is sitting are real-life coins that were minted in the early 1940s in Vichy, France, while they were under control by the Nazis. I find the presence of these coins to be pretty weird, and I can't think of any reasonable justification for their inclusion. I'm hoping that whatever texture artist was responsible for this just googled old coins or the equivalent in some kind of photo reference resource and threw them in the game without knowing about their origin or context. I highly doubt that director Miyazaki knew about this inclusion, nor the other subtle little oddities like the I want mock money engravings found in the Tower of Latria. There's also this gold circular object texture present in the area, which may be another coin or an engraved plate of some kind. I have no idea what the origin of this texture is. It's pretty hard to discern what the center image is supposed to be because of the combination of its intricate details and the low resolution of the texture. If anyone can identify this, please leave a comment below. Looking closely, we can see a subtle animation of Astrea struggling to keep her eyes open. Speaking of eyes, if we look closely at the pile of corpses nearby, we can see that several of them are bleeding from their own. The unclean ones, or plague babies, or whatever you want to call them, are another disturbing detail that seems to get worse and worse the more you think about it. A lot of the discourse around these things seem to collectively assume that they are aborted fetuses or otherwise unwanted children, but there is no dialogue or anything in the game that specifically states this. It would certainly fit into the theme of unwanted things in this area, but I think there's another possible explanation which is equally dark. Looking closely again at Astrea herself, a stream of blood flows underneath her into the swamp. A mass of flesh appears to have grown from the bottom of her skirt, perhaps symbolic of her literally becoming one with this environment, and by extension, continuously giving birth to these little guys. A possible relevant detail is that she's also cradling the visible demon soul like one would with a newborn baby. It's pretty clear that Astrea is supposed to evoke the archetype of the chaste maiden, and if she truly is giving birth en masse to these little creatures, it represents what is perhaps the single largest sacrilegious moment in a game full of demonic inversions of familiar human and cultural aspects. Ultimately, though, like many other things in these games, it is open to interpretation.